Good evening. Hi, welcome. Welcome to another micro sermon, another Red Bull kick to see us through the day. I was thinking, particularly at this time of year, of Christmas and some of the things that make up our typical Christmas, particularly in Britain, in this country. And I was thinking of TV forms a pretty vital part of everything that we do at Christmas, and the Christmas TV special. This is a pretty familiar part of the fabric of Christmas Day here in the UK. And, you know, right through the 70s, 80s, 90s, there have been various programmes that people have crowded around to watch. Things like Morecambe and Wise back in the 70s, or Only Fools and Horses in the 80s and 90s, and more lately, things like Strictly Come Dancing. And, you know, who wouldn't bet against Downton Abbey being 2011's most watched programme on Christmas Day? And I'm just thinking back and to 1963, and there was a programme that started in November '63. It was on the same evening as Jukebox Jury and Dixon of Dock Green, two programmes that have long disappeared from the TV schedules. But this particular programme, it had a strange sounding title, and it was called Doctor Who. And Doctor Who has gone on from 1963 right through to Christmas Day 2011, and it's broken all sorts of records, including being the #1, the longest running science fiction programme of all time. And I just wondered who would be able to remember what that very first episode, all that time ago, 50 years ago, was called. And it was called An Unearthly Child. And it was talking about the travelling companion of the Doctor at that time, but an unearthly child. And I thought, wow, what a title that would be for Jesus. He himself had his unearthly credentials, and we'll take a look at some of those at the minute. I've got 5 lined up to take a look at. Jesus' unearthly credentials. But first, let's look at some aspects, some viewpoints of Jesus, not particularly ones that line up with the Bible, but ones that are generally out and about in our society, some maybe earthly views of Jesus. It was the Apostle Paul who said, at one time, we all thought of Christ from an earthly, human perspective. And also he said, later on he said, there would be very many perspectives on who Jesus would be. So let's have a look at pop culture and just consider some of those viewpoints, if you will. There have been, in terms of movies, there have been over 100 movies that depict Jesus, ranging from those that have tried to honour him, like The Passion of the Christ, right through to things that have, sort of mocked him. Maybe Life of Brian would fall in that category. There have been stage shows featuring Jesus, things like Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell. Many TV shows. From time to time, he turns up on The Simpsons, and my research says he also turns up on South Park. He turns up on TV shows. In the music industry, who could forget that it was John Lennon who said that, hey, we're bigger than Jesus now, when he was talking about the Beatles. Jesus comes into all these different arenas of life. He was actually voted in 2004, he was voted the greatest black icon of all time. Loads of people just identify with Jesus and who he is. Some offbeat homages have been paid to him. There's a t-shirt that people like Madonna and Brad Pitt and Ben Affleck have worn, and it just is entitled across it, Jesus, he's my homeboy. And a homeboy is a kind of a slang term for someone who's your friend. So Jesus, he's my friend, he's my homeboy. There's some random things like a 110-foot Jesus air balloon. Nice touch. There are monster trucks. There's a Jesus monster truck. That's slightly random. And from time to time, we're all aware that Jesus turns up on a piece of toast. His face turns up burnt into a piece of toast. A strange medium to use to communicate to your followers, but it's it's certainly a perspective. And one thing we've got to say about Jesus in the last 2,000 years, there's a lot been said. But one thing that Jesus isn't is ignored. He's never been ignored from the moment that he set foot on the planet. And Mark Driscoll made this quote during a series that he put together called Vintage Jesus. He said, "Jesus Christ today is the most extraordinary, the most loved and hated, the most widely considered person in all of human history. More songs have been sung to him, more paintings painted of him, and more books were written about him than anyone who has ever lived in history of the world." Amazing statements. So our theme today is an unearthly child. So let's look at 5 factors that made Jesus unearthly in this sense. Jesus said, he was talking to some teachers at the time, and unearthly fact number 1 is he's been with God since the very beginning. He was talking to some teachers and he said, "I have come down from heaven." I mean, that's a statement that blows your mind, isn't it? I have come down from heaven. It's a bit like a missionary. Modern day missionary movement. Somebody goes from one land to a different land, and in making that transition from one land to another land, they learn the culture of where they're going, they learn the language, and they learn everything about the place that they're going, so they can be an effective witness for the purpose for which they were sent, the sent ones, the apostles. That's what that word means. Jesus was a missionary, he was an apostle, and he came from above, he came down from heaven. He was an apostle sent from the very throne room of God. He's Emmanuel, which means God with us. You know, and in making these statements, he's claiming divinity. He's claiming that he was in heaven with God. That's what he's claiming. And you know, there's plenty of evidence biblically that these statements could be refuted, or God himself could take action if he disagreed with some of the statements that Jesus made. While the apostles were moving around in Lystra, which was a town in those ancient days, Barnabas and Paul were actually mistaken or assumed to be the gods of Zeus and Hermes, the false gods. And they soon set the record straight, and maybe part of this in the back of their head, back of their mind, they would have remembered that not long since they had got to Lystra, a chap by the name of King Herod had claimed to be God. He said, "This is the voice of God speaking to you," when it was just his voice. And he'd been eaten up by worms, and that was God's judgment on what he said. But we don't see any of this with Jesus. Jesus makes these divine statements, and there's a sense of authority in what he says, and a sense of truth. So Jesus was with God in the beginning. Unearthly fact number 2, the Word was made flesh. Jesus is God incarnate, or in the flesh. And I was sort of mulling this over, and the phrase that came to me is kind of like an avatar. Bear with me here. Avatar, not in the sense that maybe we mean it today, which is, you know, a virtual imitation of a real person. That's what we mean when we talk about an online avatar or the movie Avatar. But much more to do with its 18th century root. It was a Sanskrit word, and it meant the descent of a deity to earth in incarnate form. That's what we're talking about here when we're talking about Jesus made flesh. But again, you know, that doesn't that falls short. That picture. It's the picture of an avatar maybe is more akin to what happened in the Old Testament, when the second person of the Trinity, who we now know as Jesus, came as visited earth, many visitations or Christologies. The angel of the Lord he came as, or maybe as the burning bush, or the commander of the armies of the Lord. Maybe that's more of a picture of this avatar, because Jesus wasn't just a deity who came in human form. He was that, but he also was fully man. He was fully man. He was fully God and fully man, and he was both of these things. So, you know, God added humanity into his deity. He was both fully man and fully God. And you know, his humanity isn't in question whatsoever. He was born in a rural backwater to a teenage girl. She conceived him as a single mother. He was adopted by a carpenter named Joseph. He had two brothers who both went on to write books of the Bible for themselves. And some point between the age of 12, where we have stories about Jesus in the Bible, and then again at 30, in those years that the Bible doesn't highlight what went on in Jesus' life, some point his father, Joseph, his adoptive father, had died. And that's a very real family setup. That's not uncommon to us today. He was definitely very human. Our unearthly fact number 3 was that he's the image of the invisible God. Jesus said, "If you've seen me, you've seen the Father." Another striking claim to divinity. And Thomas, one of his disciples, his closest friends, he wasn't corrected, which he might have been if Jesus wasn't God. He wasn't corrected when he said to Jesus, "My Lord, my God." He said those statements and he wasn't rebuked for it. Hebrews says that Jesus, the Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. So if we know God, or if we know Jesus, we know God. And we know that Jesus was compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, rich in love, and good to all, and removes our transgressions. And these are all things that are attributed particularly to God in the Old Testament. And those qualities Jesus exhibited. So our unearthly fact number 4 is that Jesus was a mediator between God and man. His given name, Jesus, was a derivative of the Old Testament name Joshua, which means Yahweh or God saves. That's what that name meant. And then Christ is actually a title rather than being his surname. Jesus the Christ. Which means anointed or chosen one of God. So his name was the anointed one of God, chosen to save God's people. That's the kind of the essence of his name, Jesus Christ. He said, "I am the way." And that's part of a longer sentence and statement that he made, but in those few words there, "I am the way," Jesus was saying, I'm the only way to God. I am the only way to the Father. If you want to make it to God's presence, then I'm the only way to get there. You come through me. And that's where he's being our mediator. The prophet Ezekiel in the Old Testament talked about someone to stand in the gap. Who will stand in the gap? And that's what Jesus does, is stand in that gap between God and between man. So, that's Jesus acting as our mediator. And finally, unearthly fact number 5 is that he's head over all things. After he died, after he was resurrected, but before he went back to heaven, Jesus said, again, another startling statement. He said, "All authority, both on earth and in heaven, have been given to me." Jesus had been delegated all authority. And in this, he is head over all things. And we see this when Paul talks about the church. He refers to Jesus as being head of the church and head over all things. So those are 5 things, the unearthly facts about Jesus. He was an unearthly child in that sense. And I hope this Christmas time that you experience Christmas to its fullness, which means fully understanding who Jesus was and the claims that he made. Well, I hope you have a blessed Christmas, and God bless you. Remember, be passionate always for him, and remain in him always. God bless.